Spend a few minutes catching up. And in the meantime, I'll change my glasses so I can see. Let's see, make sure these guys are not all smeared up, which they are. What's new? I hope that everyone got through the Lunar New Year well and everybody was able to stick to their Daniel fast and their melatonin rich diet. So today I want to go back and revisit some information that I've already put forward, and that was on a lot of the work that I was talking about with the ley lines. And I received an email from a new channel member, and this viewer was talking about their interest in the material that I've been putting forth about the apocalyptic horsemen and the ley lines. So, what I decided I thought would be interesting is if we listen to the video. I've tried to get in touch with this particular author. I found this author on Facebook, um, and I've tried to get in touch with him to talk to him more about the subject, since this is information that uh, I've been working on. It's a big focus of my studies. And the fact that I live here right on top of this ley line. So I'm going to play the video and we're going to listen to this. But before we get started in that, I want to revisit the Thiaoouba prophecy book that I'm reading for the second time now. I'm reading this book for the second time now because this book is really packed full of information. Well, in this, and I mentioned a little bit on it when I did the video on it's like 4 books that I'm reviewing, and then I don't have a book on the Gaia hypothesis yet. I've been to the library, and they have a portion of our library is under construction, so I gotta see if they're open today. I gotta pick up the book. I had to get it sent in, the Florida place name book. I've done a lot of videos where I've used this book as a reference, the Florida place name book. Someone stole the book from my library, so they had to order it from another library. So after I get that book, we're going to dig back into that book about these place names, because so much more is coming into perspective now, with the whole information about us being in Satan's little season, and that we've already been in the Christ millennial. And this information of Jesus being at the North Pole, guys, if you didn't see that video, go back and watch the last video that I just did about Satan's little season, the North Pole, about the Nordic beings, about the Bacratinians. Pretty interesting, the Chinese. Well, one of the things that is talked about in this book is this 9-layered soul system is what we have, 9 layers of oversoul. Now, when I was going to school for the Kalantic material, I was taught that it was 144,000 and it was divided into layers of 12. And I've done videos where I have put this information forward, because this channel is all about me learning stuff and sharing everything I've learned, whether I agree with it or not, guys. Whether I agree with it or not, I try to tie my own experiences into the material that I'm learning, because I have a lot of experiences. So, I'm not claiming that all this stuff is right. None of us will know 100% until we cross over, guys, right? I mean, a lot of us have bits and pieces spoon fed to us. And then, you could do a lot of reading and studying. There's a lot of material out there. It's just that, if you're like me and you're in your 50s, you didn't have access to this kind of stuff. The academic institutions controlled all the knowledge. So, this is a 9-layered system, what they talk about. And the reason that I want to revisit this ley line stuff today is because of this reason. Okay, so in the Thiaoouba prophecies, they talk about you having one oversoul that divides into 9 layers. And then that 9 layers divides into 9 more layers. Then that 9 layers divides into 9 more layers. So essentially, you get the mathematics of a fractal with this soul, way that this soul is stacked. Okay, look here. Your first one, your first layer is 9, right? Because you went from 1 to 9, right? Then your second one's going to be 9 times 9, which is 81. Then your third stack, your third one, would be 9 times 9 times 9, which equals 729. Okay, so now add all 3 numbers together. 9, 81, 729. You get 820, guys. 820. 82, 28, 28, the days of the menstrual cycle, in between menstrual cycles. 28, the lunar calendar. 28, we've talked about 28 being the number of the primordial mother. She shows up in the number 13 and 28. So after I seen that, I had made a comment about that because I'd gotten this epiphany, right? And that's another thing that I want to talk about too in this live, is I want to talk about stuff that I see in the field, okay? I don't claim to be a trance channeler, okay? I don't go into a trance state. I don't decorate myself with all of these costumes. I don't have all this paint and stuff on my face, stuff on my head. I don't have all that stuff. I don't do all that stuff, okay? I was born getting downloads at night and being able to see in higher frequency spaces, okay? It's not something that you just sit and you go into an act and then all of a sudden you pick up the phone. It doesn't work like that, guys. And you don't need to go asking somebody for them to tell you about your soul and your oversoul. You are your own oversoul. No one can tell you your story, guys. Don't waste your money paying these people for ascension mechanics. Don't do it. Stop it. You're being taken for a ride. All these people that give all these readings and do all this stuff and charge all this money and charge all this for all these books and all this. Sure, it's great to read someone's personal story. You know, if you want to publish a book about that, that's wonderful. Share your story. But if you want to be in the right vibrational space to embody the 13th archetype, you have to untangle yourself from the quantum field, the quantum entanglement of money, guys. Money is the Antichrist. Everyone keeps saying AI, AI, AI. It's not, guys. These higher dimensional beings are technologically advanced. Okay? That's not the Antichrist. The Antichrist is technology without using your heart space and being caught up in materialism, where you care more about material things than you care about these types of things that come from the heart, guys, about things that involve the heart space, nurturing, raising children, growing things, being a steward to the planet, being a good parent, being a good sibling, being a good neighbor, being a good person. AI is not the Antichrist, guys. The people behind it, the money hungry people behind it, are the Antichrist. Okay. So if we've got 820 layers of oversoul, I mean, that's why they picked Michelle to go on the trip. You'll have to excuse me, the dogs start barking. They picked Michelle for the trip to their planet was because he had had 82 lives on Earth and he was an adept. And there's not many people on Earth that have had 82 consecutive Earth lives, according to this book. So the number 82 and 28 is coming up again, guys. So I think that's really interesting. So this video that I'm going to play, and it's just going to play in the background because I'm not technologically advanced. I'm not, I'm still trying to figure out how to edit this video that I did. I did an interview, and I want to take the first section of it out, and I did it on Zoom, and I have no idea how to do it. And I've not had enough time at home here lately to sit down and figure it out. So I need to talk to somebody who knows how to edit videos. I need a little help here because I look like a complete ass for not publishing this video. This video I'm going to play is about ley lines, and it's on the YouTube channel Wake Up with Maya. And I'll put the link to the original video after the live finishes and we post it to the channel. And I'm probably going to play it on 2 times because my phone is low on battery because I only charge it every few days. Okay, so here we go. All right. And I'll stop it if there's anything I want to interject.
Aloha and welcome to another show, guys. Today I had the pleasure of speaking with Sesh Hedi, the author of Handprint of Atlas. We delved into some truly fascinating topics, including California's Disneyland ley lines, Florida ley lines, and a special focus on Hawaii's ley lines. This conversation is packed with insights, and it really gave me a new perspective on these subjects. And this episode will only be in audio. But before we get into it, I want to take a moment to ask for your support. I understand that not everyone can support the podcast financially, and that's okay. But if you enjoy the content, there are other ways you can help keep the podcast free and accessible to all of our Ohaina. Sharing the episodes with your friends and family, following the podcast, hitting the like button, and leaving a positive review are incredibly helpful.
And I gave it a positive review.
Support, but it also helps others.
She does have some really good guests on her channel.
It would truly mean a lot to me.
Okay, so let me just skip to it.
Because the clicking happened during the most exciting part of the episode. It was when we were talking about the Hawaii ley lines. So I'm hoping you guys can still hear it and enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening, guys. Sesh, welcome to the show. It's a real pleasure to have you here. I really want to say that your book, Handbook of Atlas, is incredibly fascinating and very deep. I found myself challenged by some of the material at times, but what I did grasp was so thought-provoking that I'm really eager to dive into it with you today, and I'm hoping to get a better understanding with your explanation of everything. So if you can at least start maybe telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and what led you to explore the theory of geomorphology and its impact on human civilization.
Yes, and first I'd like to say I'm very happy to be here today with you and talking with you across the Pacific Ocean.
I hope you guys can hear it.
I think that's so exciting. And it's just like we're right in the same room here. My interest in geomorphology goes way, way back on this in my book. Really, when I was very young, before I started school, I was interested in drawing. I started drawing when I was probably 1.5, 2 years old, and I drew all sorts of things, but I got a hold of a road map that it was probably a California road map. It showed the coastline, and I wanted to draw a map like that, and so I used it as a model, and I set about drawing a line and trying to create a coastline. And when I finished, I looked at it, and then I looked at the real map, and I thought, that's not a real coastline that I drew. And I didn't mean that I didn't copy the other map exactly. What I meant was, it didn't look real. I had done a fictional coastline, it wasn't a copy of the map. It was just my idea of a coastline, but it didn't look real to me for some reason. I could see that it was just lines. I didn't have the feel of it being a physical reality. And so I tried several times to draw this map and couldn't do it. And I finally gave up. I thought, there's something here I don't understand. I wasn't even going to school yet, but I realized, I said, I don't understand this, but there is something here. I've been thinking about it, and eventually I'm going to figure it out. Well, it went decades in the back of my mind, and all of those thoughts came back to me very strangely around the year 1985. By that time, I was 30 years old, and some of these thoughts came back to me, and I realized that was what was puzzling me all those years. Why does these coastlines look real? You know, they have a shape to them that is unique no matter where you go in the world, and you look at a coastline, it looks natural, it looks real. And, you know, we don't know why. I didn't know, but I began to figure it out in 1985. And that was the beginning into geomorphology seriously. I didn't even know what the word meant in 1985. So I had to teach myself all of this. And it was the result of these experiences I had in Florida in 1985 that led to me understanding all of this. And I continue today trying to understand it all.
Wow. Yeah, December 23rd, 1985, you said that was a significant date for you.
Yes, that was the date when I had this rather odd experience. I've been having synchronicities, little odd experiences all through that trip. And what had happened was my brother, he called me up and asked me if...
Now you have to remember that Florida, where he's talking about, sits on a crystalline ridge. This is a ridge, and it's the highest elevation in the state of Florida, and it's way up the coastline on the next elevation is equal or higher. And the reason is because millions of years ago, a meteor hit in Lake Wales at 82.28 degrees. That is Lake Wales, Florida, and there's a tower that sits on top of it called Bach Tower. Okay, it's going to be just a minute. We got to get through the dog barking. Hold on. I'm going to start playing it again and try to get these guys quiet. I'll be right back. All right, guys, that's enough.
I wanted to go on a vacation with him to Florida, and I jumped at the opportunity. So we started planning it months in advance and talking about it. But before that happened, a number of months before we even started talking about going to Florida, I had a very strange dream. I call it my rocket dream. And it was about a rocket explosion that I experienced in the dream. It was night, and I was in a strange place, and I describe all this in the book, but essentially I dreamed that I saw a rocket explode on its launch pad. And it was very disturbing to me when I woke up, and it stayed with me for a long time. The rocket in the dream, the way it looked, it was very thick, and it was orange rust colored. Now, back in the 1980s, they did have the space shuttle, and I had seen it launch a few times on television. But in those days, when I was seeing, there was the space shuttle attached to the main launch rocket, and it was white when I saw it, the way I remembered it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the dream, it was a similar kind of rocket, but it wasn't white. It was a rusty orange color. Well, what I didn't know was that as the years went by and they were used as these rockets, they got rusty on the outside, and they got a patina of rust on them, so that they started looking like the rocket in my dream, which at the time, when I had the dream, I thought it was the craziest thing. Who would think that they would launch a rusty rocket into space? You know, you think it would fall apart. But it was just a slight side of that rocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 1985, when we started planning this trip, I thought of the rocket dream because one of the itinerary attractions was to go to Cape Canaveral and see a space shuttle launch. It was scheduled right at the same time we were going there. And so we had that plan. We were going to see the launch. And so here we are in, it was called World Showcase, or Epcot Center. It was a pavilion right in the center of Epcot. And in that pavilion, they had big shops, tourist shops and such, but they also had this big room with a giant screen, very big screen, and they had a news broadcast going on continually talking about the space shuttle launch. And we stopped and were looking at that, and the commentator suddenly said, well, they've decided to postpone the launch because of ice. It's so cold at night, the rocket's freezing up, so we're going to postpone that, and So, I kind of looked at my brother and thought, well, we were speculating about, was this some kind of precognitive dream? And now we can rest easy knowing that we're not going to be there during a launch and see the thing blow up, So, that was good, and we were happy about that. And we went through Disney World and everything, and we went all through Florida. We went all the way down to Miami and the Everglades, and we were coming back up the next day from the Everglades, going up that central highway, which at the moment I can't think of what the number on that was. But
Okay,
it goes
he's
right
talking about this one.
It
27.
goes past Clock Tower
right
and
here.
Cypress Gardens. We stopped off at Cypress Gardens, looked around.
Okay, so I'm going to pause that.
And then that evening, we continued up that highway toward.
Okay, so he's talking about coming up Highway 27 right here, and he says Lake Wales. Lake Wales is right here. You see this road that's going across here? That's Hesperides Road, guys. Hesperides, like the Garden of Hesperides. That's Hesperides Road, or Highway 60. It goes across the state of Florida, guys. So he's talking about literally driving up on top of the crystalline ridge, and he's talking about getting to Lake Wales right here. This is where Bach Tower is. This is where the meteor is. This is Hesperides Road intersecting. The only place that Highway 27 intersects with Highway 60 is in Lake Wales. Okay? All right. So we're going to refer to being north of Lake Wales, and he doesn't know where he's at, but he's talking about being in a little town called Dundee. And then after Dundee, before you get to Davenport, there's a little tiny area called Lake Hamilton. So this is the place that he's talking about in his story. Okay.
Orlando. And in approaching Orlando, we had a little incident. Should I tell about that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so what happened was I was driving. We had a rental car. I was driving, and my brother was in the passenger seat. And, that area of Florida, particularly in 1985, it was not developed. It was just a lot of woods.
Orange groves.
And it was a 4-lane highway. We're driving along, going north.
Yep.
And
used to
up
be
ahead
two.
was an intersection with lights, with traffic lights. And I could see that the green light was on, but there was a car directly ahead of me, stopped at the green light. And I could
Now
tell
he's
that it was
talking
stalled
about
out or
State Road
stopped, having engine
542.
trouble or something. And I slowed down, and two people got out of the car. The driver and the passenger on his side, two men, got out of the car, and they started pushing the car over into the left turn lane.
I used to live walking
So
distance
my
from
brother
there.
says to me, well, don't stop. Just pull around the car to the right and proceed on through the intersection.
Okay.
Well,
This is
something
542
about that
and
didn't sit right
27.
with me. I can't tell you what it was. It was just an intuition. And so I didn't do what he asked. I just sat there, and I said to him, oh, they'll be out of the way in just a second. Let them move the car out of the way, and then we'll go on through. And no more than a second after I said that, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and I saw two huge headlights coming directly at me from behind. And those headlights whished by the right rear side of my car and nearly hit us, and proceeded on through the intersection at a high rate of speed. And I just had a split second to realize it was a big rig cab. It didn't have the trailers on it. It was just the cab.
Bobtail.
And it sped by, went through the intersection, off the road, and struck a telephone pole or an electric light pole, broke it in two, and then the cab spun around at 360 degrees and came to a stop. Well, we were in shock from this, and I carefully and slowly pulled ahead, pulled over to the side of the road, around the cab, and pulled to the side of the road in front of the whole situation there, stopped the car, got out, started walking over to the cab, and I could see that there was a large electrical cable on the pavement sizzling away with who knows how much voltage of electricity in that. It was a dangerous situation, all right. And so I approached the cab and called out, is everybody okay? And a man's voice said, yes, we're all right. And then the door opened, and he got out. This man was probably about 35 years old, a tall, athletic man. As soon as he got out, I noticed he had a cut on the back of his hand, and it was bleeding a little bit. And then a little boy, about 7 or 8, got out, and then a lady got out. So it was a full family there in that cab. And the guy said to me, I thought I better go off the road than kill somebody, because it was me, my brother, and then those other people in front of us that were trying to get the car off the road. And so they, everybody seemed all right. They were just walking around and looking at the whole situation. But there was that light pole broken in half, was a big, thick wooden post, and then a police cruiser suddenly came up. He got out, and I told him what I saw, what had happened, and I told him I was out of town, and we talked briefly, and he said, "You can go on your way." He understood we were tourists out of state, and so we went on our way. Everybody seemed all right, was under control. And when we got back in the car, I said to my brother, "I want you to drive." Mm-hmm. So he got behind the wheel, and we drove off. And we were driving for a few minutes, and then I look over at him, and I notice that his seatbelt is secured, snapped onto him, but I don't remember him, putting the seatbelt on. And I look down at myself, and I notice that I have my seatbelt on, and I have no memory of having put my seatbelt on. And I asked him, I said, "Do you remember putting on your seatbelt?" And he said, "No, I don't." I said, "Neither do I." And then we drove on in silence for a little bit more, and then I said, "I wonder where that happened. I wish I knew what town that was or whatever." And he said, "I just happened to notice right before it happened, as you were approaching the intersection, we passed a sign. It said Dundee." And I said, so that was Dundee, Florida, where this happened. Yes, it was Dundee. So that stuck in my mind.
About a stone's throw big, too.
This trip, without making it extremely long story,
there used to be some railroad tracks that ran through Dundee. They still have a...
the way, with all kinds of things, like our license plate number of the rental car, where we stayed, the address of where we stayed in hotels along the way, people we encounter in restaurants who looked like doubles of people we actually knew back in California, things like that. So we were having all these synchronicities. And my brother drove us on up to Kissimmee, which is just right there at Disney World. And so at Kissimmee, in those days, you could get film developed back in the old analog days, film for your camera. And they had the 1-hour photo development. I don't know if you're old enough to remember those.
I do.
Days, but yeah. So for our generation or whatever, we remember when there were these 1-hour film development places everywhere. So we just stopped at one, and I had all
there
these
used to be one up by Haines City
that I had taken on the trip. So I wanted to, let's go ahead and develop them, and we'll have pictures before we get home, and we can look at them. So we went into this place, we dropped them off, and as we're talking to the people running it, I mentioned to them that, "Hey, I'm from California." "Oh, where in California?" They asked. "Well, Sacramento." And we know people in Sacramento, and they talked about them, and then they said they live in this, they named the apartment building, and I thought, well, I know people who live in that apartment building myself. So here was another synchronicity, is the whole point of that. That kind of capped the whole experience, and then the next day we flew back to California. Now, when we got back to California, I get out a map of Florida, and so I had 2 brothers. One of them was with me on the Florida trip, and the other one didn't go on the trip. He was back here in California, so the 3 of us are discussing the trip when we come back, and I get out the map, and I show him the state of Florida, and I showed him where this near accident happened. And I have to say this, too, that before we left, I told both of my brothers about that rocket dream. And my oldest brother said, "Well, maybe that is just a symbol of something that might happen to you on your trip, like an automobile accident."
He got activated.
Now, that was in my mind.
When he came to Florida, and he was on the ridge.
When we got back, that's why I'm telling him about the automobile accident. And I see that there's Dundee, where it happened. And I noticed Coral Castle, which really interested me. That it was down there at the tip of the southern end of Florida. And my eye kind of drew a line between those 2 spots. The chairs are not comfortable. And I realized something, that geometrically, that line was like the center of the state physically. It was like the long axis of the Florida Peninsula, which really intrigued me. And so I started looking north along that line on up through the the state, and I realized that defines the axis of the long axis of the Florida Peninsula. And I said that to my brothers. And I kept extending that line on up into the United States. And I noticed some things. It started crossing some very interesting spots. I won't go into all of them right now, but the main thing was when I got up around where it crossed through the site of Abraham Lincoln's birthplace, I noticed off to the west by just a few short miles a town named Dundee. It was in Kentucky. That caused me to pause and look at that area. And I pointed it out to my brothers.
Memphis,
and then,
Tennessee.
We started noticing some other things. There was a town there named Sacramento, Kentucky. And now I'm a native Sacramentan. I know all the history of this area, how the name Sacramento came to be given to this town. And I know, I didn't believe at that time that there was another Sacramento anywhere. It turns out, yes, there is a Sacramento, Kentucky. And years later, researching this further, I found out that someone from this town where I live, Sacramento.
So one interesting thing he's talking about the town where he lives. The town where I live, which is just outside of Lake Wales, off of Highway 60, the one that he was intersecting with, where he was talking about earlier. Okay, this place is called Indian Lake Estates, but that's not what it originally was called. It originally was called El Delgado, which means golden. Golden. Delgado means gold. Was this the city of gold in the fifth dimension? I'm telling you, Florida is the Garden of Eden. The next Garden of Eden will show up in Florida. And the reason I say that, it's not just like a physical spring coming up. It's a vibrational state, because the solar plexus of the planet is at Bach Tower in Lake Wales, Florida, at 8228 degrees latitude longitude. That's in Florida. Telling you right now, there's a meteor underneath Bach Tower Gardens, and there's a very high exclusive community that's attached to that called Mountain Lake Estates, and all of the robber barons of the reset have homes there, guys. And you can look up the architect Olmsted, who did all of these. It did Central Park and a lot of other very famous places. You can look at his list of jobs that he did at Mountain Lake, and you'll see all of them. And matter of fact, it was the Rockefellers made the Lakeland Ledger because they had so much drama. They had so much drama out there in Mountain Lake Estates. But there is an energy vortex here, guys. And all of the lakes that are around here are from fragments of this meteor that sprayed out. And they're all sea gates. All of these water, big lakes around here, these sinkhole lakes, all these little meteor, they look like fingertip lakes. It's called the chain of lakes here. They're all energy lakes. Okay, so as soon as the dogs stop barking, we're going to start the video back, guys. All right. Okay, guys, that's enough. Ghost, come on now. You're going to break the wall here with your tail. All right, Benji. No, stop. Okay, guys, here we go. Bear with me.
California moved to Kentucky and named that little town there after Sacramento, California. So there was definitely a connection between the two towns there, causally a connection, but there was also a synchronicity emerging out of this, because not only was there a Sacramento, Kentucky, just a few miles away, like Dundee, Kentucky, there was a Beaver Dam, Kentucky. Now, no one would think anything about except that happens to be my grandfather's place of birth. Oh, and I should also mention that Sacramento is my place of birth, and it's the place of birth of my brother who was with me on the Florida trip. So there you have my place of birth, my brother's place of birth, then at Beaver Dam, my grandfather's place of birth, which was not the Beaver Dam, Kentucky, but Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. And then there was a Hartford, Kentucky. Well, who was that? That was my oldest brother. He was born in Hartford, Alabama. So here we have this little cluster of towns with place names reference to where I was born and my two brothers were born and my grandfather was born. So I started calling that the constellation. and it looked like there was some kind of pattern there. It would take me several more years to work out what that pattern was. It was a real pattern, and it was a pattern on the landscape that was objectively there. So this was a major synchronicity. But at the time, I didn't fully appreciate how weird it really was. But anyway, I continued that line on up into the United States, thinking about Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, to see where it went. Well, in fact, it did not pass through Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, but it sure passed near Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. And it went on up into Wisconsin to Thames Hill. Thames Hill is the highest point in Wisconsin. It's a small mountain, and I've been there, and it is covered with radio towers. It's festooned with radio towers, and that is highly significant. And I don't know how much we'll get into the whole ley line technology today, but that was my first, well, it wasn't my first inkling, but it was one of the early realizations I had that something very dramatic was going on with the use of these ley lines, these shapes upon the land. But anyway, that was the beginning for me. I realized I had discovered something important. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I was certain that it was very important. So I continued looking at that, studying that, and then I used California, my home state, as a laboratory readily at hand that I could also analyze. And I began to realize that there was a similar kind of alignment here in California that I had been aware of slightly since the 1970s. And so in the Handprint of Atlas, I describe all of this, and I explain how I discovered this ley line in California, and I was on my way. That was the beginning of me eventually reconstructing the whole grid of ley lines over the entire world, the major ley lines.
Wow.
I don't have every minor ley line mapped out. A lot of times people will ask me, well, are there any ley lines in this area where they live? And I'll say, well, I'll have to look at a map and analyze that to tell you exactly. I can tell them generally where I know of a major ley line nearby, but they want to know their hometown.
Sure.
And there are minor ley lines almost everywhere, and this is an open secret, and it's a big story. It goes back through the whole human race's history, to the Great Pyramid, and I talk about it in my book. But this was the beginning for me. This is how it started.
Yeah, that's incredible. I know you talked about the twin peaks that you saw when you're walking in the marketplace in San Francisco. And
Yes.
You noticed that there were some kind of lines there.
Yes, that was
Once you
the
see, you can't
second major
unsee.
ley line I discovered. So back in the 1970s, see, I'm a native Sacramento, but I never went to San Francisco until I was 15 years old, and that was 1970. And so this was later on, the mid to late 70s, because I lived in San Francisco during those years, a little bit on and off. And so one day I'm walking up Market Street, which is one of the major thoroughfares in the city of San Francisco. It's very famous. There's several streets there that are famous, like Van Ness Avenue, Market Street, Columbus Avenue. These are major boulevards, and anybody who's a tourist that's been to San Francisco, they know these places. You probably know Market Street from a lot of movies. They've set various movies there on Market Street, and sometimes, interestingly, it's not set in San Francisco. They'll use that as a locale for a foreign country or something, because it is a very interesting street. There's a movie called On the Beach. I don't know if you ever saw that or not.
No.
On the beach, and it's about a world war, and the whole planet gets polluted with atomic radiation and nuclear radiation, and the only place, it's the South Seas and Australia are not affected at first. So, but every place else in the world is getting wiped out. It's an apocalyptic scenario, and so they show, I think it's supposed to be Sydney, Australia, and they show this picture of this wide boulevard and all these people on bicycles riding along, and it's supposed to look like a foreign country to American eyes, but it's actually Market Street in San Francisco. I'm just saying all this to give you an idea that this is a big boulevard, the financial district where all the big buildings are at and everything. But toward the southwest, it looks off at the end of that street. All these buildings frame the view of a little mountain, and the peak of that mountain, it has twin peaks. It's two little peaks. They're
probably
almost
has
exactly the same
Nordics
height
living
and shape.
underneath it.
They look artificial. And in fact,
Talking about
in my opinion
California.
today, I would say they are artificial, but they're extremely ancient and, eroded as something, say, that was carved 15,000 years ago for some purpose and looked a certain way. And then imagine 15,000 years passing with erosion and sedimentation, and it begins looking like a natural formation. And we can
Well,
find
California
this
is
all
where
over the
Lemuria
world, where
was,
you'll see
that whole
something that
area
you'll say,
out
well, that's
there.
just a natural formation. But if you know where
And
it's
the Sea of
located
Jesus.
and you can look at it carefully, you'll
And
begin to
the
realize,
land of
oh no,
Jesus
that's not natural.
by the
That's a
North Pole.
sculpture of so and so or such and such. It might be like a
And it's
giant
a fault
skull,
line.
or it might be a human head. But it's all eroded, so now it looks like just an outcropping of rock. Well, that's what the way these Twin Peaks were. I actually thought when I first saw them, this was the first time I ever saw the Twin Peaks, and I hadn't read anything about it, didn't know anything about it, but I realized that something about that's artificial, and somebody got up there and carved that for some kind of stunt. That was my first thought, and then I thought, no, wait a minute, that's not possible. It would cost a fortune to carve a mountainside like that. Nobody did that. I couldn't figure it out, and I thought, I've got to go up there and investigate that sometime. Well, years went by, and I never investigated it. But I later found out, well, that's Twin Peaks. I was looking in books about San Francisco, the whole history of the peninsula. And yes, of course, there's Twin Peaks. It's just a natural formation. Everybody knows about it. There's a road. You can go up there and go to the top of the thing if you want.
And not to just get off subject, but it is kind of interesting that everything is twins. And that's one of the things that I've been told over and over again by all these beings that I encounter in astral is that it's all about twinning. Twinning. Everything's in pairs. Everything. So it's Twin Peaks. So I wonder what that means.
Too, which I eventually did, but I kind of wrote it off in a certain way. But I get into the mid 80s after I've been to Florida and thinking about straight alignments, and I thought, oh, and I got a book. Let me talk about this book, The New View Over Atlantis. Have you ever read that or seen that book?
No, I have not.
Okay, so I would say to anybody
We need to get that book.
interested in ley lines,
I forgot
seriously,
about
that's
that.
what we're talking about here today, ley lines. Ley lines have gotten a really bad press in the mainstream media and the mainstream science community. They don't believe ley lines are real. They'll say that's just a coincidence that these sites are connected with a straight line. There's nothing to it. Well, I completely disagree with that, and I've spent more than my life
I disagree as
studying
well.
all this. I have a completely different view. And so when I got back from Florida, I had these little pamphlets I had purchased at Coral Castle. And perhaps some of the listeners out there know about Edward Lee Scalman and Coral Castle.
I do.
I don't know if we'll have time to get into that too much today. That's a story all into itself.
Some heartbroken love story.
At Coral Castle, it's an incredible
They want
place.
to loose harvest you there.
If you ever have an opportunity,
Oh,
I know
poor
you
guy.
have
He waited. He built
relatives
all
in
this
Florida,
for his
right?
Yes.
woman that he was trying to
sometime,
win
next
her
time you go
heart.
to Florida,
And she
you
just
should make
gave him the
plans
shaft. And he
with your
died there
relatives for
alone.
a trip down to Miami, to Homestead, Florida, to see Coral Castle. That's the name it goes by today. Edward Lee Scalman built this place. He called it Rock Gate. But it's an incredible place, and it's inexplicable in a conventional sense. I'm absolutely certain he used an anti-gravity technique to levitate these multi-ton blocks of stone to build this 1 acre compound.
I think they called it the Levelock or something like that in the Thiaoouba prophecy.
Florida to see Coral Castle. Now, they have a gift shop there, and at the gift shop, I purchased every book they had available. And I got a little pamphlet book written by someone that was pretty interesting. Several of these books were interesting, and it was also Edward Lee Scalman's writings. I got those. But in this book, in the bibliography, one of the books listed was The New View Over Atlantis. The New View Over Atlantis by John Michell. Michell. I highly recommend this book to anyone who's interested in ley lines. And I would say this, read The New View Over Atlantis first, and then read my book, The Handprint of Atlas, because there's a definite connection between these two books. But this is where I started understanding what I had experienced in Florida quite a bit better. And as I'm flipping through the pages of the New View over Atlantis, just absolutely agog at all of this information was just flooding in upon me, and strangely feeling so familiar to me. It was more like I was remembering than learning. And there was a picture there. I'm flipping through it right now. Oh, here it is. It's on page 60 of the New View over Atlantis. Here's the caption on that page. It says, "The old Chinese landscape featured stretches of straight tracks known as spirit paths. They were sanctified in the temples and shrines through which they passed. This spirit path through the temple of the Manchu tombs, Chihili province, is directed to a notch in the distant hills." And boy, can you see it. They have this very interesting garden in the foreground with a little path that's straight as an arrow, spirit paths. There was a picture there. I'm trying to get it better.
Okay, we got to hear that again about the Chinese.
Through the pages of the New View over Atlantis, just absolutely agog at all of this information was just flooding in upon me, and strangely feeling so familiar to me. It was more like I was remembering than learning. And there was a picture there. I'm flipping through it right now. Oh, here it is. It's on page 60 of the New View over Atlantis. Here's the caption on that page. It says, "The old Chinese landscape featured stretches of straight tracks known as spirit paths. They were sanctified in the temples and shrines through which they passed. This spirit path through the temple of the Manchu tombs, Chihili province, is directed to a notch in the distant hills." And boy, can you see it. They have this very interesting garden in the foreground with a little path that's straight as an arrow, and it goes straight to a door in the temple. There are 3 doors in the temple, and it goes directly to the center door, and then the temple is beyond that, and then directly you keep going in the far distance is a range of mountains. And in the exact direction of this line is a notch in those mountains. They have built this temple upon a spot that is reference to that notch in the mountains. They knew that there was a straight line force passing from the mountain at that notch on down into the valley where this temple's at. So everything they did there was
Interesting that he says the Chinese. That's interesting because, from the Thiaoouba prophecy, we learned that the first human form looked Chinese that was here on Earth. And the primordial mother, she definitely is some type of Oriental, no doubt about it. And she's a little tiny body.
very precise. It was precise engineering, but it was an esoteric engineering. So when I saw this photograph, I immediately thought of Twin Peaks in Market Street, and I said, that is a spirit path. What's going on here? So that sent me off to analyzing San Francisco, Twin Peaks, Market Street, and
you notice how all towns have a Market Street?
You follow Market Street. It's at an angle from the cardinal points.
All downtown. We have a Market Street downtown too.
San Francisco run east, west, north, south, conventionally as a city grid. But Market Street is following its own course at a diagonal southwest to northeast.
Okay, so let me think if I can remember which way that Market Street goes in our town. It goes north and south. Yes, it goes north and south because it intersects with Highway 60 on down further. So that's interesting.
It goes right into Twin Peaks and on out to the coast and the ocean. The implication is that line must go right on out into the ocean somewhere. Mm-hmm. And also the implication is Market Street's pointing across San Francisco to the East Bay. It's going over there to the East Bay, and the hills over there, and the mountain range of the coast ranges is going on over there. And so I drew a line. I drew it on a California map all the way across California, and it passed through Sacramento, where I was born, and it keeps going and going over into Nevada, and it crosses Pyramid Lake in western Nevada,
Well, think about it. Sacramento, sacrament, sacred. I mean, it does make sense, all linguistics, right? And the other thing is the town that I live in is called Lake Wales, like Welsh. And then the interesting thing is that there's a lake in Lake Wales called Lake Wales, but it's spelled Whales. The town is called Wales. And the mascot is the Highlanders, Scottish Highlanders, because we're high elevation here because of the meteor. It's just interesting how linguistics tell you everything.
So now at that point, I've got another line, and I start analyzing it and thinking about it, and that's how I began to really understand that I wasn't imagining this. These were real objects and shapes of the land. So morphologically based geomorphology means the shape of the land. Geo, earth, shape, ology, the study of land shapes. So it's quite simple. Geomorphology. It's a branch of geology. So, that was the beginning of it. But, it continued on for years, and it became more and more complex as I studied it. And I eventually wrote the handprint of Atlas and had it published in 2006. And I'm still looking at things, still studying, still learning. And eventually, it got so complex that.
So anyway, this interview is 2 hours long.
Now it's like
but
tower.
He talks about Bach Tower.
Several million years ago, from what I call a hotspot. Now, this is also used. This term is also used to make interesting thing about the continent of Africa. It has more hotspots on it. It's been
okay, let me see if I can find the part about Bach Tower real quick.
The surface of the earth, deep of the land of the earth, lay. They call it right. And there's reality top, but it appeared there in the floor of the Pacific, and then it was
I know he talks about Bach Tower here.
A little bit to the west, to oceans. But all of these were closer together, and then as time goes on, they're kind of spreading out a little bit.
Okay, so let me see if I can find the transcript here. If I can find the transcript on here, I can see when it is. Transcript, here we go. All right, so he's talking about, let me find where he talks about Bach Tower. Okay. Yeah. Oh, come on. He does talk about Bach Tower. Well, anyway, he goes on to talk about how Bach Tower is basically the X marks the spot for these ley lines, which is what I've been saying for a while, that when I was learning the Keylontic material, that the thing that I discovered was the Ascension Library. And when I started looking at the Ascension Library, I started looking at the Amenti gates, and it shows where there's stargates all over the world. Now there's energy vortexes everywhere, wormholes, things like that, but that's not exactly the same as the Stargate, because Stargate is like part of the planning of what goes into a planet, and there's systems that are put in. It's like the basic structure of the planet is the Stargates, and they're of course on cycles. When they open, when they close. During the ascension times, they open in a certain order, and then the last one to open is the first one to close. It's the way that I understand it, but that could all be different because, I've taken a lot of classes that I learned a lot of stuff, but I also learned a lot of stuff that wasn't accurate too. So, so it's interesting. Yeah, I want to go back and start looking more at the ley lines, and because when I was reading the Thiaoouba prophecies, and I'm reading it twice now, but Michel was an adept, and he was picked for the journey because he had 82 lifetimes on Earth. And I was like, oh, 28 backwards, 82, right? And then we talked about the ley lines being at 28 and 82, and that the apocalyptic nodes are in between 80 to 82 degrees on the map on these three of the four horsemen apocalyptic nodes. And that's stuff that shows up on the Ascension Glossary. You can go back and look at all the work and look at the map and see for yourself all of the things that are marked on there. Everything marked on the grid, it's totally filled out. So, I wanted to put this video about these ley lines on there because when I got this information that it's actually 9 layers of the oversoul, it's 9, not 12, because in Keylontics you're taught that the oversoul divides out to 12. Those 12 divide to 12. Those, the multiplication, you just multiply it out and you end up with 144,000. Well, in the Thiaouba prophecies, you end up with 820 because the dimensions of this mathematical equation that they give for the soul and the oversoul dividing to 9 layers, those 9 layers dividing into 9 layers, and those 9 into 9 more, you end up with 9 times 9, which is 81, 9 times 9 times 9, which is 729. And that is a fractal, my friend, which, when I first started having like a lot of these dreams, and I realized that there was a lot more to my dreams than I always thought they were. Like, I knew that I used to have precognitive dreams, and I would be told stuff was going to happen before it would happen. Even as a child, I would have this type of dreams. Well, a lot of times I'd have terrifying dreams too, really bad stuff. And, my parents would say, "Oh, you were having such a bad dream." But, I've been having these kind of dreams my whole life. And so when I started getting like all this information into my dream space, I kept getting about this importance of the number 28, and that there was a reason that I was born on the 28th day. And it all had to do with my life path, that I'm supposed to be here for ascension. So, everything is coded. It's coded in names, it's coded in words, it's coded in layers. But I really do believe that the Thiaouba prophecy might be a little bit more accurate about those soul numbers, is that 82. And so we really need to go back and revisit these apocalyptic nodes and dig into this more, because I think it's important. I think it's really important that that's coming back into the field. And the other interesting thing is how much stuff is coming in the field now about Greenland. I don't know if how long y'all have been following the channel, that you've watched the videos where I talk a lot about Greenland. It may not be labeled on the video, but I talk about Greenland a lot because that's where I started doing my work at as a child, was going underneath Greenland to get through that celestial North Pole. You got to be coded for it to get through it. And so I'm definitely going to look at getting these books, and especially this one that he's saying is a must read, and then we can go to his next, but I got to read his. Maybe I can get the New View over Atlantis on Audible and I can listen to it, and then I can order Handprint of Atlas, from his website. So, any questions? Have you been doing okay? Anything new, exciting in the field? Well, if no one has any questions, I'm going to wrap up the video. It's been, how long have I been streaming? An hour. Been streaming an hour. And I wanted to come on here. So when I finish up the video, I'll put a link in there, Waking Up with Maya's interview. And you can watch the whole thing. But there, the part in there that he does talk about Bach Tower in there is super interesting. So with that, the author's name is Sesh, Sesh, Harry, Heri, which is interesting. Oh, I just got a thump on my watch from Theo, because I was thinking Mark of Heru. When you get your initiation mark, a lot of people will get a scar a birthmark, an injury, some type of something will happen to one of their eyes. And that's when you're getting an initiation mark saying, hey, your sight is developing better. Or you get a mark around your mouth. That means that it's time to speak your truth. And then, depending on what side of your body, if it's on the left, it's your feminine channel, your right, your masculine channel. So, yeah, I got the mark of Heru on my right eye when I was a child. I fell on a ballpoint pen and almost put my eye out. It went right in my eyeball right here. Just narrowly missed my eyeball. And I was fighting with my brother as usual. My one brother and I, we mixed like oil and water. So I got my mark when I was probably about 3 years old. So I had my initiation mark early. So with that, I'm going to end the video. Thank you for spending an hour with me today. Get outside today and enjoy it. It finally stopped raining here in Florida. I'm going to go out to the greenhouse. I am so absolutely thrilled with the greenhouse. I'm so disappointed in myself for not not spending the $200 and buying a greenhouse like years ago. Man, I could have saved myself a big headache. So don't forget that we have the other YouTube channel called the 13th Archetype. And if you want the link to that, you can get the 13th Archetype link in the community notes on the channel. And I hope to catch everyone over there. So we're learning about our self-sustainable lifestyle and embodying the 13th archetype, putting forth the life that we want to see, manifesting our reality as. So with that, have a great day, everyone. Thanks for watching Sacred Enzyme. Catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.